At 6:42 on February 26, 1945, pharmacist mate second-class George Wahlen crouched in a volcanic ash crater on Iwo Jima, watching his platoon advance toward airfield number 3 through a forest of Japanese mortars. 20 years old, just 37 days into his role as a combat corpsman, and already 14 Marines from his company were dead. The Japanese had turned Hill 362A into a fortress, carving more than 500 interconnected caves into the volcanic rock. Every single yard the Marines gained came at the cost of blood. Wahlen had landed on Iwo Jima only 7 days earlier with Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 26 Marines. The black volcanic sand clung to everything: uniforms, weapons, wounds. The sulfur-filled air burned his throat with every breath. But none of that compared to the worst part, the screaming. Every advance brought the cry he had been trained to answer. Corpsman. The 5th Marine Division had been told this would be a 4-day operation. General William Rupertus himself had assured the men they would secure the island quickly. That was before they discovered what Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had built beneath the surface. This wasn't just a battlefield, it was an underground war, hidden hospitals, ammunition depots buried 20 feet below ground, machine gun nests positioned with perfect interlocking fields of fire. By February 26, the division had already taken over 3,000 casualties, and corpsmen were dying faster than the Marines they were trying to save. Japanese snipers had adapted quickly. They learned to spot the Red Cross on helmets. They learned to listen for the word corpsman and aim directly at the voice that answered. Wahlen had already treated 43 wounded Marines in just 7 days. Sucking chest wounds, traumatic amputations, burns from flamethrower backblasts. He carried morphine, syreds, sulfa powder, battle dressings, and plasma. Nearly 30 pounds of medical gear on his back, while the Marines around him carried rifles. The rules were simple. Corpsmen were unarmed. The Geneva Convention protected medical personnel, but the Japanese didn't follow those rules. They targeted corpsmen deliberately. 14 Navy hospital corpsmen had already been killed in Wahlen's battalion. Another 22 had been evacuated with serious wounds. At 07:15, Fox Company began moving forward again. Wahlen followed about 20 yards behind the assault line, scanning constantly for casualties. The terrain was a nightmare. Jagged volcanic ridges, deep ravines, and hidden gullies turned every movement into chaos. Marines would move forward and simply vanish, swallowed by the terrain or cut down by unseen fire. Then the mortars began. Japanese observers on higher ground had a perfect view of everything below. The first round landed 30 feet in front of Wahlen. The second hit 15 feet behind him. The third came down directly in front of Corporal James McKenna. Wahlen didn't hesitate. He ran forward instinctively. This was what he had trained for at Camp Pendleton. This was why he had chosen to join the Fleet Marine Force instead of staying safe in a hospital back in California. McKenna was still alive, but barely. Blood was pouring from multiple wounds. Wahlen dropped beside him and immediately got to work. Sulfa powder went onto the wounds. Bandages were packed tight. Then he heard it. A sound every corpsman feared more than anything else. The hollow, unmistakable thump of a Japanese grenade launcher. The grenade landed just 3 feet away. It bounced once in the soft volcanic ash. Wahlen saw it clearly, and in that moment time slowed down. He had maybe 2 seconds. McKenna couldn't move. There was no way he could get him to safety. The nearest cover was 15 feet away across completely exposed ground. And in that moment, Wahlen faced a choice: stay and die with the Marine he was trying to save, or run and live with the knowledge that he had abandoned him. The grenade exploded. The blast slammed Wahlen into the side of the crater. His ears rang violently. His vision turned white. Then came the pain. Shrapnel tore into his face, ripping through his left eye and cheekbone. Blood poured down, mixing with ash and sulfur into a thick, burning paste. But McKenna was still alive. Somehow the grenade had missed him by inches. Now both men were wounded, exposed, and completely vulnerable while mortars continued to fall around them. Wahlen didn't think. He reacted. Training took over. His left eye was gone, nothing but darkness on that side. Pain was overwhelming, but McKenna's injuries were worse. A deep wound in his leg was pumping blood rapidly, arterial bleeding. Without a tourniquet, he would be dead in minutes. Wahlen forced his shaking hands into his medical kit. His vision blurred, his head spun, but his right eye still worked. His hand still worked, and that was enough. He secured the tourniquet tightly around McKenna's leg, stopping the bleeding just in time. Wounds, packing them with sulfa powder and dressing them as quickly as possible. All around them, machine gun fire tore through the air. Bullets snapped overhead. Mortars continued to fall, shaking the ground with each impact. Other corpsmen saw what had happened. One of them, pharmacist mate 3rd Class Robert Hayes, began crawling toward Wahlen's position. When Hayes reached him, he froze for a moment. Wahlen's face was covered in blood. His left eye was destroyed. It was immediately obvious they needed to leave now. Standard procedure was clear. Evacuate both casualties immediately to the battalion aid station. Hayes told him they had to go. Wahlen refused. Fox Company was still advancing. Men were still going down. Every corpsman mattered. Hayes could take McKenna. Wahlen was saying. They argued briefly, but it didn't matter. No one could force a corpsman to leave the line. They were all volunteers. Every single one of them had chosen this. If Wahlen wanted to stay half-blind, bleeding, and barely able to function, that was his decision. They placed McKenna on a stretcher. 4 Marines lifted him and began carrying him back through the ash. Hayes stayed with them to provide cover, and Wahlen remained behind alone in the crater, half blind, bleeding, watching Fox Company push deeper into hell. As the minutes passed, the adrenaline began to fade and the pain came roaring back. His eye felt like it was filled with molten metal. The sulfa powder he had poured into his own wounds burned intensely. His breathing grew heavier, but the battle wasn't stopping, and neither was he. Then, once again, the cry echoed across the battlefield. Corpsman. Wahlen pushed himself up from the crater, ignoring the searing pain in his face and the ringing that had filled his head since the grenade. He could hear the distant rumble of artillery and the screams of Marines, but somehow, amidst the chaos, he found a narrow path between 2 ridges. Smoke from flamethrowers and burning bunkers hung low, stinging his lungs, but he moved forward. Every step was agony, every breath a struggle. Yet there was no choice. Corpsman never quit. Ahead, he saw Private First Class Henry Thompson clutching his stomach and collapsing behind a jagged mound of black volcanic rock. Thompson's scream pierced through the air. Wahlen ran, his uniform shredded, his face a mask of blood, and threw himself beside Thompson. The private's eyes were wide with terror, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Stay with me, Thompson," Wahlen shouted, though his own voice was barely audible over the chaos. He ripped open his medical kit, fingers trembling, and pressed gauze onto the bleeding wound. The blood soaked through almost immediately. He worked methodically, as if rehearsed, even though his left eye couldn't see half the battlefield. Cut through the air. Wahlen looked up and saw a Japanese soldier moving along the ridge, his rifle raised. Reflex took over. Without thinking, Wahlen grabbed a rock and hurled it. It struck the enemy's helmet and threw him off balance, giving Thompson just enough time to roll into a shallow depression. More Marines were down nearby. Wahlen crawled from one to the next, slapping tourniquets in place, packing wounds, and whispering reassurances. He couldn't keep track of how many he had helped, or how many had died before he reached them. There was no time. There was only the next Marine, the next scream, the next step forward. By mid-morning, Fox Company had managed to gain a few hundred yards, but at an appalling cost. The volcanic sand had turned to mud from the constant bombing, and every step forward was slowed by corpses, wounded, and debris. Wahlen paused for a moment, leaning against a scorched tree trunk, and felt exhaustion wash over him like a wave. His face was swollen, his left eye useless, his hands slick with blood, both his own and others. He could hear a radio call from the battalion aid station. "Corpsman down at Sector 3, need immediate support." That was him. His name was being broadcast, yet he was still out here, still in the line, still saving lives. A bitter smile crossed his bloodied face. Then came the Japanese counterattack. Snipers and machine guns swept the ridges, cutting down advancing Marines. Mortars fell with terrifying precision. Wahlen realized the attack was meant to crush the small gains they had made. He didn't think he reacted. Lieutenant Carl Brenner, running beside him, went down with a bullet through the thigh. Wahlen dove to his side, dragging him behind cover. The lieutenant's eyes met his, fear and disbelief shining through. "You're not leaving me," Wahlen said firmly. "No corpsman can survive this," Brenner gasped. Wahlen ignored him. He ripped open the medic pack, applied a tourniquet, and stuffed gauze into the wound. Blood was everywhere, thick, hot, and sticky. Wahlen could feel it soaking into his hair and clothes. Another round of fire straight. The area throwing dirt and shrapnel against his back. He was barely aware of it. Every second counted. From the corner of his functioning eye, he saw a young Marine, barely 17, frozen in fear beside a shallow crater. His name was Private Samuel Kerrigan. He hadn't fired a shot. His weapon hung limply in his hands, and he was staring at the carnage as if paralyzed. Wahlen scrambled over, shouting, "Kerrigan, move! You're not dying today!" He grabbed the boy by the shoulders and dragged him into the crater with Brenner. The 2 Marines huddled there, terrified, while Wahlen treated both of them. Sweat, blood, ash, and tears mixed together, making the scene almost surreal. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, baking the volcanic sand and revealing the true extent of the battlefield. Wahlen's movements were mechanical, every action driven by instinct. Each life saved was a victory against an enemy that seemed to have endless men and endless cunning. By afternoon, the company had pushed forward another few hundred yards, but Wahlen's body was failing. His head spun, his limbs shook, and his mouth tasted of iron. Still, he pressed on, refusing evacuation, refusing to consider his own mortality. He reached a group of Marines pinned down behind a ridge. The Japanese had set up a machine gun nest directly across from them, cutting off any chance of advancement. Corpsmen were supposed to be protected, but here, there was no protection, only action. Wahlen crawled toward them, low and fast, dragging a Marine who had been hit in the shoulder. Another grenade exploded nearby, throwing him into the dirt. He got up, ignoring the blood and the pain, and continued. When he reached the group, he realized the machine gun nest wasn't just one gun. It was 2, set at angles that created a deadly crossfire. Every Marine in sight was vulnerable. Wahlen acted without hesitation. He pulled out smoke grenades and tossed them into the open, creating a temporary cover. The Marines followed him, using the smoke to advance and drag the wounded to safety. Wahlen stayed in the open just long enough to ensure every man got behind the cover. Then he retreated, limping and half-blinded, but still alive. Even as he fell back, another call came over the radio. Medic Sector 5, urgent casualties. He gritted his teeth, thinking of the wounded Marines still out there. He had no time to rest, no time to consider his injuries. Corpsmen didn't get to rest. Corpsmen didn't get to think about themselves. Corpsmen moved. By late afternoon, Wahlen had treated over 70 Marines. Many were stabilized, some evacuated, some lost, despite his efforts. He could no longer feel the burns on his arms, nor the swelling on his face. Pain was irrelevant, survival was irrelevant, only the work mattered. The Japanese continued their relentless defense. Every foot forward cost another Marine. Every advance meant more suffering, more cries for help. But somehow, Wahlen persisted. He moved like a shadow across the battlefield, ignoring the chaos around him, guided by the sole principle that had kept him alive this long. Save lives, no matter the cost. As night approached, Fox Company finally reached a temporary line of defense near the northern edge of the volcanic ash fields. Marines collapsed in exhaustion, many unconscious, many crying, many staring blankly at the sky. Wahlen, too, sank to his knees, finally allowing himself a moment to feel the weight of everything. His face was unrecognizable. Half of it was swollen beyond recognition, blackened by burns and blood. His uniform was torn, his boots caked with mud and ash, his hands trembling. Yet, in that moment, he knew that over 100 men had survived that day because he had refused to leave the battlefield. A small voice called out to him. Private Kerrigan, wide-eyed and scared, held out a canteen. Wahlen took it, barely able to lift it to his lips, but managed a sip of water. You saved us all, Kerrigan whispered. Wahlen shook his head, blood dripping from his face. I didn't save them all, but I saved as many as I could. The night fell, and the fire of mortars and machine guns slowed. The battlefield, strewn with the wounded and the dead, was eerily silent except for the occasional moan or shout. Wahlen finally allowed himself to lean back, exhausted, and close his one functioning eye. Somewhere in the darkness, a corporal whispered a prayer. Wahlen didn't join him. He had no words, no prayers. Only the memory of faces of blood, of lives balanced precariously between survival and death. He knew that tomorrow would be worse, that the Japanese had yet to unleash their full fury, that more Marines would scream for a corpsman who might not arrive in time. But he also knew this. As long as he could move, as long as he could breathe, he would be out there, crawling through ash, running through fire, reaching for every man who needed him. Because that was what a corpsman did. The night February 26 had settled over Iwo Jima like a suffocating blanket. The volcanic sand, blackened by fire and blood, stretched endlessly under a pale moon. George Wahlen's body screamed for rest, but sleep was a luxury he could not afford. Even in exhaustion, he knew the next dawn would bring renewed attacks, and corpsmen were expected to be everywhere, yet invisible, moving silently through chaos. He moved carefully, feeling the weight of the dead and wounded beneath his boots. Each step was a careful negotiation with the terrain, every ridge a potential trap, every crater a potential death. His hands, still caked in the blood of friends and enemies alike, trembled. But Wahlen refused to think of himself. Survival was secondary, action was everything. Suddenly, a flare lit the sky, revealing a group of Marines pinned down by a Japanese machine gun nest only 50 yards away. Wahlen assessed the situation, calculating angles, distances, and cover points. Without hesitation, he crawled forward, dragging a wounded Marine, Private Leonard Haynes, whose legs had been shattered by mortar fire. The young man whimpered, blood pouring from his shattered limbs, yet Wahlen ignored the screams, the smoke, the bullets whizzing past his ears. He reached a small depression, pressed himself against the rocky soil, and applied a tourniquet to Haynes's legs. The blood flowed profusely, soaking through the bandages almost instantly. Wahlen stuffed more gauze, muttering encouragements, though he knew words were futile. The young Marine's eyes met his briefly wide, terrified and filled with hope. Another explosion rocked the area, throwing Wahlen off his hands and knees. He felt the impact in his ribs, the burn of shrapnel across his arms, but he continued, crawling forward. He could see the enemy gunner silhouetted against the moonlight, and he threw a rock to distract him. The Japanese soldier reacted, and Wahlen seized the moment to drag Haynes further back toward a safer trench. Hours passed in a blur. Wahlen moved relentlessly from one Marine to the next, ignoring his own injuries. His left eye, already swollen shut, made depth perception nearly impossible. His right eye burned from the ashen blood. His ears rang constantly from gunfire, explosions, and the screams of the dying. Yet he did not stop. Every Marine who survived that night owed their lives to him. At dawn, Fox Company had advanced slightly, but at catastrophic losses. The black volcanic landscape was littered with bodies, some mutilated beyond recognition, some still clinging to life. Wahlen counted mentally, trying to keep track of how many men he had saved, how many had perished despite his efforts. The numbers blurred, but the faces haunted him. A sudden scream from the east drew his attention. A squad was pinned behind a low ridge, unable to advance or retreat. Wahlen moved quickly, zigzagging through the open sand, dodging sniper fire. He reached Corporal James Donovan, whose leg had been hit by shrapnel. With no time for finesse, he applied a field dressing and dragged Donovan to cover. Nearby, Private Kerrigan, still barely 17, was trying to bandage another Marine with shaking hands. Wahlen grabbed him gently. "Stay close to me," he said. "Follow my lead." Kerrigan nodded, his wide eyes reflecting terror and awe. Wahlen realized then that these boys would carry the memory of his actions long after the battle, yet he felt no pride, only duty. By mid-morning, Wahlen had treated nearly 120 Marines. The Japanese counterattacks were relentless, using flamethrowers, mortars, and machine guns to cut down any who advanced. Wahlen's body was failing exhaustion, blood loss, and pain had reached critical levels, but he refused evacuation. He could not leave. Corpsmen never abandoned the field, not even for themselves. He spotted another wounded Marine, Private Samuel Perez, trapped in the open with a fractured arm and leg. Bullets tore the sand around him. Wahlen sprinted, dragging Perez to cover while a mortar round exploded nearby, throwing both of them into a crater. Shrapnel tore through Wahlen's uniform, burning his skin, but he continued, applying tourniquets and bandages. Nearby, the Japanese launched a concentrated attack, attempting to reclaim lost ground. Wahlen saw the tide of Marines faltering, fear and confusion spreading. Without hesitation, he grabbed 2 injured soldiers and carried them under fire to a temporary trench. Each step was agony, each movement a battle against his own body's rebellion. Hours melted into another. Wahlen's vision blurred, the blood and sweat mixed with ash, covering his face in a grotesque mask. Still he moved, still he saved. He became a shadow of death and mercy, simultaneously terrifying and revered by those who survived. Late afternoon, a temporary lull allowed the company to consolidate. Wahlen collapsed near a burnt-out bunker, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked over the battle. Blackened ridges, shattered trees, and the countless forms of the dead and dying. He counted the wounded again. The number of lives saved barely scratched the total suffering, yet it was something vital. A young Marine stumbled toward him, carrying a first aid kit. "Corpsman, need help?" he asked, and Wahlen shook his head weakly but motioned him over. They worked together, treating the remaining injured, reinforcing the temporary defenses, and preparing for the inevitable next assault. Night fell again, but the battlefield remained alive with danger. Fires burned in scattered craters, illuminating the night sky with hellish glows. Wahlen moved from one Marine to another, guided by the faint sounds of distress, ignoring bullets, explosions, and falling debris. His hands were raw, his muscles shredded, but he pressed on. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the Japanese soldiers calling, ordering, screaming. They knew him now, the corpsman who defied death, yet Wahlen did not fear them. Fear was a luxury. Action was his only reality. By the third night, Wahlen had treated nearly 200 Marines. Exhaustion, pain, and the unrelenting barrage of attacks had reduced him to a shell of a man, yet he continued, crawling, running, dragging, lifting, bandaging. Each life saved was a spark of hope amidst an ocean of death. He paused for a moment, leaning against a scorched ridge, and allowed himself a single thought. He would not stop. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until every Marine who could survive did so. Corpsmen were the lifeline, the shadow in the smoke, the unseen guardian of life in a world ruled by death. The 4th day of the battle dawned with a muted gray sky, the kind that seemed to swallow light and hope alike. The black volcanic ash stretched in endless waves, punctuated by the jagged remnants of ruined bunkers and shattered trees. Smoke rose in spirals from the scattered fires, mingling with the morning mist, and the scent of gunpowder and blood was thick enough to choke. George Wahlen, though exhausted beyond comprehension, forced himself upright. The cries of the wounded had not ceased, and the corpsman knew each second mattered. Fox Company was a shadow of itself. Every Marine carried the marks of the inferno burns, cuts, bruises, and terror etched deep into their faces. Wahlen moved swiftly among them, his own uniform torn and caked with grime, applying dressings, adjusting splints, and offering words of encouragement. Even when his own body begged for rest, the day wounded would not wait. A sudden volley of mortar shells shook the ground violently. Wahlen barely had time to dive into a nearby crater before the earth erupted around him. He felt shrapnel tear across his back, burning and tearing, but he pressed on. Nearby, Private Daniels screamed, clutching his mangled leg. Wahlen crawled to him, applying a tourniquet with trembling hands, ignoring the burning pain in his own body. He whispered to Daniels, "Stay with me. We'll make it." The Japanese had reinforced their positions overnight. Machine guns, mortars, and snipers were concentrated along the ridges, creating a deadly web of fire. Wahlen knew that each trip across open ground could be his last, but the corpsman instinct drove him forward. No Marine would be left behind if he could help it. He spotted Lieutenant Hawthorne pinned against a low mound, his arm bleeding from a gunshot wound. Without hesitation, Wahlen sprinted across the exposed terrain, bullets kicking up sand around him. He reached Hawthorne, pressed him into a shallow crater, and applied a field dressing. Hawthorne's eyes were wide with panic, but Wahlen held him steady, muttering, "We get through this together, one step at a time." Hours bled into one another. Wahlen moved from one wounded Marine to the next, ignoring explosions, screams, and collapsing earth. Each life saved required ingenuity, improvised stretchers, field dressings torn from his own uniform, and relentless determination. He became a phantom in the smoke, a figure of mercy amidst unending carnage. By mid-afternoon, the Japanese launched a coordinated assault. Flamethrowers, machine guns, and grenades cut through the defensive lines. Wahlen spotted a squad trapped in the open, several of them screaming in agony. He crawled under fire, dragging one Marine at a time to safety. His hands were raw, his eyes blurred, his body screaming in protest, but he did not stop. Each man he saved strengthened the other's resolve. Fear was contagious, but so was courage. Near the southern ridge, Wahlen encountered a group of Marines attempting to carry a wounded comrade, Sergeant Miller. The soldier's legs had been blown apart by a mortar round. Wahlen took command instantly, directing the others to form a protective perimeter. Under relentless fire, he lifted Miller, dragging him toward a temporary trench, his muscles screaming under the weight. Explosions rocked the earth, sand and ash covering them. A suffocating cloud. Wahlen's lungs burned, but he pressed on. Night fell again, but the Japanese were relentless. Snipers prowled the ridges, flamethrowers lit fires across the landscape, and sporadic artillery strikes shook the ground. Wahlen moved silently through the chaos, guided by the moans and cries of the wounded. He treated burns, fractures, gunshot wounds, and shock, improvising solutions with whatever materials were at hand. Each life saved was a small victory against the tide of destruction. By the fifth day, Wahlen's body was pushed to the brink. Exhaustion, dehydration, and injuries threatened to overwhelm him, yet he continued. His hands were shredded, his vision blurred, and his ears rang from constant gunfire, but the corpsman's resolve was unwavering. He moved from Marine to Marine, administering aid, stabilizing the injured, and lifting morale. Even in the darkest moments, his presence brought hope. A sudden explosion tore through a nearby trench, throwing Wahlen to the ground. Debris rained down, but he scrambled up immediately, ignoring the pain. He found Private Reyes pinned under rubble, his legs mangled. Wahlen cleared the debris, applying tourniquets and binding wounds with remnants of uniform. Reyes whispered a trembling thank you, and Wahlen nodded, his expression unreadable. There was no time for sentiment, only survival. Throughout the day, Wahlen coordinated with other corpsmen, establishing makeshift aid stations, directing litter teams, and improvising treatments. He became the backbone of Fox Company's survival, a constant force amid unrelenting chaos. Even when communications failed, he improvised, relaying messages, organizing evacuations, and ensuring no Marine was left behind. As evening approached, the Japanese launched a final, desperate assault. Flamethrowers ignited the terrain, smoke and fire engulfing the craters. Wahlen moved among the Marines, urging them forward, stabilizing the wounded, and directing defensive positions. He pulled Private Larson from the burning sand, carrying him to a safer trench, ignoring the flames that seared his uniform. By midnight, the lull in fighting allowed a moment of reprieve. Wahlen, drenched in sweat, blood, and ash, finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He surveyed the field, hundreds of wounded, some dead, some clinging to life, the battlefield a testament to human endurance and suffering. Yet in that chaos, he had been a lifeline, a silent guardian, a beacon of hope. He pressed on, knowing that the battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. Each Marine he saved today would fight tomorrow. Each life preserved was a blow against despair. And as the first light of the sixth day approached, Wahlen readied himself to move again, to crawl into the storm, to be the invisible shield between death and life. In the smoke under the fire, George Wahlen's resolve became legend, a corpsman who defied exhaustion, injury, and death itself to protect the lives of the men around him. He was no hero in the eyes of the world, perhaps, but to those who survived, he was the difference between life and oblivion. The fourth day closed, but the battle raged on. Wahlen's body screamed for rest, but his spirit remained unbroken. The volcano's black sand had become a testament to human resilience, and Wahlen was at its heart, moving, saving, enduring. The Japanese had not yet been defeated, but Wahlen had proven that even amidst unimaginable carnage, courage, mercy, and duty could shine brighter than the fires that consumed the island. The fifth day dawned under a heavy, oppressive sky, the gray clouds casting an almost permanent twilight over the volcanic terrain. The air was thick with ash, smoke, and the acrid scent of burnt gunpowder. Every crater and ridge seemed to tremble from the unrelenting artillery and mortar barrages. Wahlen, though battered and bleeding, rose once again, knowing that each passing hour could determine the survival of countless Marines. Fox Company was at the brink. The relentless Japanese resistance had thinned their ranks, their morale hanging by a fragile thread. Yet, amidst the chaos, Wahlen moved with singular purpose. Each man he encountered became a mission. Each life saved a victory against the encroaching darkness. At first light, the Japanese launched a coordinated counterattack, their soldiers emerging from camouflage bunkers, firing with precision and ferocity. Flamethrowers ignited the surrounding terrain, forcing Marines to leap from crater to crater to avoid the inferno. Wahlen darted from one position to another, applying field dressings to burns and gunshot wounds alike, sometimes dragging multiple Marines to safety in a single run. In one particularly harrowing moment, he encountered Lieutenant Hawkins trapped under a collapsed wall after a mortar strike. The lieutenant's leg was pinned at an unnatural angle, the bone protruding. Wahlen's hands shook from exhaustion, but adrenaline and duty surged through him. Using every ounce of strength, he lifted the debris and stabilized Hawkins with a makeshift splint, muttering urgently, "We've got you, sir. Hang on." By mid-morning, Wahlen coordinated a desperate evacuation of the southern ridge, which had become a killing ground under heavy machine gun fire. He organized litter teams, directing wounded Marines to safer positions while providing suppressive fire with any available weapon. Every movement was a calculated risk, but Wahlen's presence inspired courage in those around him. Even the most shaken Marines followed his lead, trusting him with their lives. Amid the chaos, he discovered Private Jackson lying in a crater, unconscious and severely injured. His uniform was shredded, burns covering his arms and torso. Wahlen lifted him, ignoring the intense pain in his own back from shrapnel wounds. He crawled toward a makeshift aid station, bullets whizzing overhead, smoke and flame consuming the landscape. When they reached safety, Wahlen's hands were raw and bloodied, but Jackson was alive. The Japanese, sensing the desperation of the Americans, intensified their assault. They fired coordinated mortar shells, aiming to break the last vestiges of defensive lines. Wahlen found himself in a constant rhythm. Pull a Marine from the debris, apply a dressing, drag them to safety, repeat. Hours blurred together, punctuated by explosions, screams, and the acrid stench of death. By afternoon, Wahlen's body was failing, his vision blurred, his lungs burned with each inhalation of smoke and ash, and his muscles trembled uncontrollably. Yet he pressed on, crawling over broken terrain, refusing to leave a single Marine behind. In one instance, he spotted a group of Marines pinned down by sniper fire. Without hesitation, he sprinted across open ground, dragging Private Lee out of the line of fire, applying a tourniquet and binding a gaping wound with torn uniform fabric. As dusk approached, the Japanese launched a desperate night assault. Molotov cocktails, flamethrowers, and machine guns carved a path of destruction across the island. Wahlen moved like a ghost among the shadows, rescuing the wounded, stabilizing burns, and reinforcing defensive positions. Each life saved was a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable odds. During the night, Wahlen encountered Sergeant Ortiz, whose chest had been ripped open by shrapnel. Without proper surgical tools, Wahlen improvised, using a bayonet and field dressings to stabilize Ortiz, whispering, "You're going to make it. Just hold on." Ortiz's eyes glimmered with fear and pain, but also gratitude, as he felt Wahlen's unwavering determination. By the sixth day, exhaustion had taken its toll, yet Wahlen continued to fight. His uniform was in tatters, his body covered in burns, cuts, and bruises, yet he moved from one Marine to another, a constant presence in a sea of chaos. Every Marine he saved added to the morale of those still standing, and the Japanese forces began to sense that, despite the devastation, the Americans would not falter. In a pivotal moment, Wahlen spotted a group of Marines trapped under heavy fire near a ridge. He gathered every ounce of strength, dashing forward under withering gunfire, dragging one wounded Marine after another to safety. His body screamed in protest, every muscle screaming in agony, but he refused to stop. By the time he collapsed from sheer exhaustion, several lives had been saved, and the defensive line had held. The seventh day brought a final push from the Japanese. Their numbers were dwindling, but their determination was unmatched. Wahlen moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, treating burns, gunshot wounds, fractures, and shock. He coordinated with other corpsmen, directing evacuation teams and improvising solutions for injuries that would have been fatal under normal circumstances. Near the volcanic summit, Wahlen discovered a young Marine, Private Sanders, pinned beneath rubble, his leg twisted at an impossible angle. The boy's screams echoed across the battlefield. Wahlen, ignoring a nearby flamethrower and sniper fire, lifted the debris and stabilized Sanders, whispering, "You're coming with me. We're not leaving anyone behind." The courage and compassion in that single act resonated across the surviving Marines, strengthening their resolve. As the sun set on the seventh day, the battle reached its climactic intensity. Explosions rocked the island, fire consumed everything in its path, and the cries of the wounded filled the night. Yet, amidst the inferno, Wahlen persisted. He moved tirelessly, ignoring his own injuries, pulling Marines from the jaws of death, applying field dressings and offering a steady hand and a calm voice. By dawn, the island was a scene of indescribable devastation. Hundreds of Marines lay wounded or dead, the terrain unrecognizable, yet the surviving forces had held. Wahlen, bloodied, burned, and exhausted, stood among the craters and ash, having saved countless lives through sheer determination and courage. His actions had become legend among the men of Fox Company, a silent testament to what one man could do in the face of relentless destruction. The Battle of Iwo Jima would continue for days, but George Wahlen's name would forever be remembered by those who survived. A corpsman who defied exhaustion, danger, and death itself to preserve life, Wahlen embodied the spirit of resilience, courage, and duty. Each Marine he saved was a beacon of hope. Each life preserved a triumph against despair. Even as the island smoldered and the war raged on, Wahlen's resolve remained unbroken. He had become more than a corpsman, he was a guardian, a hero, a symbol of unyielding courage in the darkest hours of human conflict. The story of his bravery would echo through history, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's determination could alter the course of life and death on the battlefield.